So, Brexit is going to be a collapse. According to the words of Boris Johnson, that was recently caught in what seemed to be a snooper recording, he admittedly said that, yes, it's going to be a collapse. Now, everyone is using this to say that one of the foremost Brexiteers, one of the highest supporters of Brexit, is admitting that Brexit is a failure. But it's not really what he's saying. He's saying that it will be a collapse, but he later on goes to say that it's okay, he just doesn't want people to panic, but it will be a collapse. What he means by this is very obvious to anyone who's ever worked in anything that is highly related to law, whether it be tax law or any sort of bureaucratic institution. What really happens is you can see this every time a new government is formed, every time a new party takes power, and they do some mild reform. It only has to be a mild reform, even if it's for the better. That mild reform will change how the laws work and will force the companies and the jobs to adapt. Now, Brexit isn't just a mild reform, it is a drastic reform, it's a drastic change. What will happen is that a lot of laws are going to change, and people and companies and businesses will need to adapt to the new model that is going to be after Brexit. When Boris Johnson says that it will be a collapse, he's not admitting that, well, Brexit is going to be an in and out failure. He's just stating the fact that after Brexit, yes, there will be a collapse, but there will be a collapse after any sort of reform, after any change. Now, the media and left-wing pundits in general are using this to discredit Brexit, saying that now even the people that supported Brexit the most, even them have turned around and realized that Brexit is a mistake, when this really isn't the case. And this line is feeding the Remoaners even more. Now, the thing people need to realize, and I see this coming from people who really haven't gone through any bureaucratic institution or have worked in anything that pertains to law, especially fiscal law. You need to realize that, yes, it will be a collapse. You will probably have 6 months where the country is going to be in disarray. People will be adapting to the new circumstances. It's not going to be a collapse as in Britain is going to go bankrupt. But he himself, Boris Johnson, said it's going to be okay. After the collapse comes the rebirth. It's going to be fine because after all the laws are changed, after laws are re-put into place, the companies will begin to adapt again. People need to realize that the European Union sets out a lot of laws that used to be passed by each state's government have been handed to the EU. So there are a large body of regulations and rules that Britain didn't enforce themselves but came with the European Union. I suspect that for a while the UK is going to keep most of the laws that the European Union had passed for themselves, and then they are going to revamp them into new laws that better fit the United Kingdom. Now, this revamping, this whole process of going from having a supernatural entity that would rule over them, set standards, set laws, set rules constantly and in a very draconian way, is of course gonna have people, gonna force people to readapt their new lifestyles and their new business practices. This is not to mean that Brexit is a full failure. It's a good thing that they are moving away from Europe with its increased draconian laws and with its increased authoritarian view on the whole European Union. And I'm going to talk about that later, the new copyright laws, the Article 13, and what it really is going to do to free speech in Europe. Now, Britain is moving away from that. It will have to readapt itself to a life without the EU, but by Boris Johnson saying that it's a collapse, it is in no way him saying that Brexit is a failure and it shouldn't go forward, and people who voted for Brexit did a mistake. That is what people on the mainstream and left-wing pundits are trying to have the population believe. But it's a lie. They had the same thing when Nigel Farage exited UKIP. They said that, well, now Nigel Farage, he forced the country to go into Brexit, and he was such a big proponent of it, and now he just abandoned ship. He realized that it was a mistake and he abandoned ship. You can see this back then, but that's not really what happened. What happened was that, and you see this, UKIP is, unless they reform, they are going to die, because UKIP had a goal, which was to trigger Brexit. Nigel Farage worked for 20 years to do this. Now, when he managed to do this, he said, well, there's really nothing else for me to do here. I'm gonna just return to my life, which for a person of his stature and the amount of smearing he got, it can get really tiring after 20 years of it. So the media is trying to apply the same thing that was happening when Nigel Farage left UKIP to Boris Johnson being now caught admitting, and it's true, it's not a lie, admitting that it's going to be a collapse. But any sensible person would understand that it would be a collapse. Any sensible person would understand that, yes, a big change in a country will lead to a temporary collapse, but usually those changes are made to better the country in the long run and have it, of course, fall down in the short run. You cannot have, it's like that old saying, you cannot make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. And it applies especially true here. So yeah, don't get fooled by the European mainstream and the left-wing pundits saying that Boris Johnson is saying that Brexit is going to be a failure. It's not what he's saying. It's an admission of truth. And people need to realize this.